Apologies for the delay, everyone. We do have it on the screen behind me. Yeah, we're going to conclude our study in the Odyssey today, and I'm a little bit behind, needless to say. But that was, I wouldn't say it was planned, it was expected at the outset because there's just too much to cover in the classes, and I'm trying to provide a coherence throughout it. And while I'm reflecting on the material in the Odyssey, I'm also commenting on it and pointing it forward to later developments, and also critiquing it from a Christian vantage point, all at the same time. I don't want to so forefront the Christian critique of it that we're not actually reading the work, because that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But I do think on occasions it's worth commenting on the fact that there is an underworld is interesting, and that there are gods, and there's an assumption in the Greco-Roman world that both these places exist, is interesting from a contemporary perspective, because our peers don't think either exists. There is no underworld, a place where the dead go, nor is there a heaven, and they're pretty happy with that. The Greeks are, I think, more civilized than we are in this respect. They don't think of themselves as animals that live on the earth for a brief span of time and then die, and then we celebrate their passing, and then that's the end of it. There's nothing to mourn because nothing has happened except the circle of life. The Greeks have a better view of this. They have a sense of justice and injustice. It's strongly represented in the Odyssey. I'm going to talk more about that briefly, because I think it's one of the central themes, and I said that one of the great atrocities of the Odyssey is that our hero Odysseus has not been allowed to come home. And although he has, in a sense, defended the reputation of all the Greeks, and they are the victors, he looks like the great loser in this grand endeavor, because he has no reputation at all at the beginning of the story. He's a legendary figure, but it's more of it's a sad story about the man Odysseus, and who knows what happened to him after the Trojan War. And even his son doesn't know what to do with this. His wife, we see a family devastated by the loss of a father. And it's magnified by the fact that everybody knows about it. So their grief is public, and yet there's no closure on it for them either, because they actually don't know what has happened to them. So it's very much of a domestic scene at the beginning, but we see it has cosmic consequences. Even the gods are talking about what's happened here, and they themselves, chiefly Athena, says that it's unjust, and says that Zeus, if you don't allow a man who has revered you and showed respect to the gods like no other man to come home, then why would anybody worship the gods? There's no reward for this. You're treating a good man like he's a bad man, in which case the world is ruled by fundamental injustice. And that's what it looks like when the story begins. And we find the backstory is that the reason for the delay is because Poseidon is angered at Odysseus for reasons that we now know. He shot his son in the eye with an arrow, and this is the giant Cyclops there. I'm going to show a few representations of this story in Western art here. This is when he's blinded, and Odysseus is vaunting aloud that he's Odysseus, sacker of cities. So he shook the cities, and Poseidon's, the father here, the earth shaker, will shake Odysseus's world. And it will be marked by injustice. There is no order in this world. There's no, the just are not defended. The defenseless are crushed. The suitors are eating his family out of house and home. It's a portrait of injustice. It's a lawless kingdom. Do the gods stand for fundamental justice, or do they not? In many ways, it's about the character of the gods. It begins as a battle amongst the gods, but really this is one of the fundamental issues here. And it's connected to human affairs. As I say, the man, the pious Odysseus, who revered the gods, is being treated like he's the worst of all people and yet he did nothing to deserve this. And so Athena says, do justice, Zeus, to him. And he says that he already intended this. It's fated that it would happen, and it will happen. He can't stop that. And there's a reason for a delay, but ultimately it will transpire. Justice will be served. And so we're left in the beginning with the suitors presenting themselves. I'm going to take this light off because I think it's bright enough, and then you'll be able to see this. What have I done here? How did I get that so messed up? You can't see that. That'd be better. See it a little bit better. I should probably close these. A little better. This is a portrait by the Pre-Raphaelite painters, 19th century, famous for all sorts of scenes of ancient Greece and Rome and tales, including those of Tennyson. We'll get to that next semester. But this is the suitors trying to get the attention of Penelope here. I've said that the epics here are recounted and read and repeated throughout the ages in literature, but they're also in painting, in music, in every other art. So the claim here, and this is from the BBC, is this the greatest tale that was ever told? 2018, the Homer's Odyssey topped our poll of 100 stories that shaped the world. I don't know if you're going to agree with that or not. You might at the end of it, but it certainly has reason and popular consensus that it is certainly one of the great works. I would probably place the Iliad above it myself, but that's another issue here. Still, there's something about this story which connects to our story, and I think in some ways you could say that it's related to the Christian story. There's a homecoming of sorts in which a hero needs to go down to the realm of the dead and arise from it and show the justice of the gods. They'll be vindicated at the end of the story, and they will uphold the man who is long-suffering and apparently he's even going to have to enter his own kingdom as a beggar, unrecognized by anybody. He's going to have to suffer a great deal in order for the wisdom that the gods honor to be demonstrated here. Now you can see the analogies that could be drawn between the story of Odysseus and the Christian faith, just in superficial ways there. And so there's something here in the ancient stories which I think suggests an awareness in even the pagan mind of Christian truth. And this is the historic position of the church, is that the great poets and sages of old have some dim foreshadowing or inkling, at any rate, of the truth that is revealed actually in Scripture. It's not with the same clarity as the prophets of the Old Testament, but there's some sort of sense of that story here, and you'll read critics or hear of them talking about this to this day, and psychologists will make much of it. Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson and so forth, they talk about the importance of these stories and the Bible as the great code of Western art and so forth. I think there's some substance in that. At any rate, we left off not with Penelope and the suitors, and not with Odysseus escaping Polyphemus, and not with Odysseus chained to the mast and who are these figures here? The sirens calling out to him. Calling out to him as his crewmates have wax in their ears. They can't hear it. He can hear it, and he longs to go where the sirens are drawing him. There's all sorts of stories in here that get picked up. The sirens call. We could have talked about Scylla and Charybdis, caught between a rock and a hard place. That's Scylla and Charybdis. These are parts of the voyage I didn't even talk about in the first half, but they're part of the story that Odysseus himself recounts. These get passed as proverbs almost into the English language, because people before you have read this story, and it has been passed on even implicitly in their understanding of themselves. So a dilemma is caught between a rock and a hard place. Are you going to go towards Scylla, or are you going to go to Charybdis? If you go to Charybdis, you're all going to die. It's a whirlpool. You all go down. But if you go near the Scylla, she's going to eat some of your crewmates. Which choice are you going to make? She takes 6 of them, eats them. He doesn't want either option. He needs to take the best of the 2 bad choices there. At any rate, lots of moral teaching that could be seen in here, but we saw last time in book 13 that Athena has recognized Odysseus in his cunning and in his deceit as somebody who's just like her. And she loves him because he bears the image of God in that sense, of this particular God. Now, I'm not talking about his physical resemblance, because her physical resemblance is almost insignificant, because she can change her shape. She is a goddess, but we've seen she's already presented herself as mentor, a wise old man. She will also appear as a young shepherd boy here on this island, in fact, and he doesn't recognize her. What he most represents her in is his character. So the resemblance of the gods is in him, in his wisdom. And it says something about the Greeks' view of human nature then, which is it's more related to character than it is actually to physical appearance. And it's not the case in Homer or in the Greeks that they hold to the ancient Near Eastern view that the phrase "to be made in the image of gods" is a title of kings. So when it says in Genesis 1:26 that we're made in the image of God, that's a way of saying we are royal, we're kings and queens. That's what being made in the image of God. It was only used by the elite of the day, but now it's being applied to humanity in general. To be a person is to be kingly and queenly. There's a nobility that comes with it. This is interesting, because we associate the nobility, the aristocracy, with a certain category of people, and we see in the Odyssey that it is associated with Odysseus. He's a hero. The other people are not heroes. There's a structure, a hierarchy there. That's not what it says in Genesis. It suggests that Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, and hence is giving them an honor that would not normally be associated with the common people. Homer is not going to think that all people are made in the image of God. He's not going to assert that. He's going to say that Odysseus is. Nonetheless, he will draw attention to a few individuals who are exceptions to the rule. Very common people. Surprising people, actually. And the first one I want to talk about is the entirely surprising figure of Eumaeus. Eumaeus. And Eumaeus looks after the pigs. And almost everywhere in culture, it is at the bottom of the social ladder. It's bad enough being a shepherd. As we see in the Gospels were the first ones to recognize, to see the birth, the star that was shining. They were the first ones in the narrative. The lowest social ranks were the ones that first recognized or saw the birth of the Messiah. The wise men showed up 6 months late, which is a sort of a subtle and very ironic commentary on the wisdom of the Babylonians. They've come from the east, they've used their astronomy, they have actually got there, so they're extraordinarily wise, but they show up 6 months after the shepherds who saw it happen. They're actually there. The wise men were not there. But in book 16, Odysseus is speaking to a swineherd, and swineherd, because it's not the case with the Greeks, but in Hebraic understanding, is an unclean animal. So in the story of the prodigal son, he's eating the food of the pigs. That's how bad things are for him, because they have food and he doesn't. He's totally lost all of his integrity. He's made in the image of God, yes, but he's eating the food of the pigs. In fact, he would like to eat the food of the pigs. That's how bad he's sunk. We don't get the same sense here. It's not degrading to that degree. It's not immoral to eat the food of pigs, or the flesh even of pigs. But it is low on the social ladder. And this man, Eumaeus, is an unusual figure. We're told a little bit about him. He was himself once a prince, and he was captured in battle, and he became enslaved. And you might expect that he would be bitter about this, but he's not bitter about it. There's a sort of sense that this happens in life, that bad things happen to people all the time, and the shoe could have been on the other foot. He could have had slaves as well, and he would have had slaves if he'd won the battle. But he's the one who ended up enslaved, and his masters treated him very well. Odysseus treats him well. And in response to this, he's loyal to Odysseus. How loyal? This is the issue here with the suitors. How loyal are they to Odysseus? How loyal is Penelope? How loyal is his son? How loyal are the suitors? It's unjust for them to be disloyal because he's a good king. And by dint of his station in life, they owed him their allegiance and they owed him honor. But they dishonor him in his absence. And they don't treat him rightly. And the suitors are eating him out of house and home and trying to get his wife for their wife. And so there's an analogy being made between the story we heard right at the beginning about Agamemnon coming home and being slaughtered by Aegisthus and his wife. And we're wondering what's going to happen here. Well, in drama we call it a foil. There's a story here, and then there's a parallel story, and they have comparable characters, but the opposite lesson is being taught. Here's an unfaithful family, here's a faithful family. And so part of Odysseus' reputation is that his whole household is good. As a consequence that he is good, it's a reflection on him to some degree. And the gods are showing favor to him because of this fact as well. So it's not just that Odysseus is praised, Penelope is also praised. And she also has wisdom. Likewise, Telemachus, his son. Yes, comment or question?
What was the other person's name, the one that got murdered by his wife?
The suitor?
The man.
Aegisthus.
Was there any indication that he was bad? Like that he deserved to be betrayed by his wife and all that?
Oh, the Agamemnon is... Oh, sorry. Yes, Agamemnon. No, he's a political character. He's not as admirable. He's very politically savvy. If you read the Iliad, it's a very interesting portrait. Agamemnon is a politician. He knows he's the leader of all of the Greeks. But that doesn't mean he's the best character. It's that he has certain political skills to get people under his umbrella. But the most revered characters are Achilles and Odysseus. And they seem to accept that he is the leader of their troop, but I don't think Homer is as impressed by him. Yes, he's the one that's in charge, but his character seems to be questionable. And that one of the reasons Achilles won't fight is because Agamemnon takes his prize girl. That's the reason. He won her in battle. It's his trophy, as it were. It's a reflection of his great deeds, and it's been taken from him unjustly. And he feels he's been dishonored by his superior who's done him an injustice.
Is that perhaps reason for him to receive
that punishment? It seems a little harsh. But what I'm saying... No, but it was his concubine. It was his girl, right? And the association there is a parallel there. You could further. Now it's not explicit, but it's implicit, and this is a good way to start reading literature. I want to encourage you to do this. is to see patterns and make the contrast, because if you're seeing them, it's almost certain that the author put them in there for you to make those connections. Yeah, it's not just arbitrary, that there is a pattern to be said there. Now, whether he is being punished for that, we don't get that from the text. Because the gods tell Aegisthus, who murders him, not to sleep with his wife and not to murder him, because the sun will avenge them if he does. He's warned all of those things, and he does it anyway. Right? So it's not the case that the gods are punishing Agamemnon for this. This is the choice of wicked men. But there is an element of justice, I guess, if you will. But it's certainly not at the forefront of the narrative. But anyway, interesting comment. But Eumaeus, going back to our swineherd here, has acted in the absence of Odysseus, when he has had no father figures, because his father's not there, and no mentors, because Mentor came into the play at Athena guise as an old man. There's no mentors. He has acted as a mentor. There was no requirement for him to do this. It wasn't his job. It's that he recognized that this was the son of the king, and because he was loyal to the king, he decided he was going to treat his son well. He could have picked on him in his absence. He said, I'm the lowest on the social totem pole, and I'm going to feel a little bit better about it myself by beating up on the king's son. And I'll get away with it. I'll do it secretly so nobody knows. I'll prey on him, and it'll make me feel big. People do this. This is predatory behavior. He doesn't do that. Nobody sees what he does. This is the thing. He acts honorably, and nobody recognizes what he has done. And except when Odysseus comes home and he's checking out the character of everyone. Now note the observation here. Odysseus is coming home in his wisdom to look at character. What does this tell you about the Greeks and their view of human nature? Character is the foremost consideration. They want to know what sort of character you are. It's not about how strong you are. It's not about how much wealth you have. Both of those are the product of your character. So there's strong emphasis on character. So it's a moral tale. And it's connected to justice. And the gods will have to reward good character with a good outcome. And there's a time when it seems like they're not doing that. But they will eventually, because they're just. That's the nature of this tale. So it's acquainting us with a view of human nature in which they recognize that there is such a thing as justice. And again, I say to you, with respect to our contemporaries, they have no such view. They don't have any such view. If judging by the movies, by the TV shows, by the books, they think that the rich and powerful get whatever they want, and that's the way the world is. And there is no justice. And so we're going to have to do social justice to try and fix it, which just makes the problem even bigger. So it just pushes people into positions, but it's not actually justice, it's just sort of the appearance of justice. If this group was unjustly treated, well, now we're going to put them on the top and we'll put these on the bottom. Why? Because they fit a certain superficial description. Yeah, but how about their character? Is that character not an issue here? Not to our contemporaries. So we do justice as well, but not on the basis of character, on the basis of appearance. Very superficial. Again, the Odyssey is closer to Christian teaching. The Lord looks not on a man's outward appearance, he looks on the heart. Looks at his character, what's inside the man's heart. That's where the judgment lies. Right? So very much of a piece with that. I'm not saying the Odyssey is teaching the same thing as Christian teaching. I am saying that its emphasis on character and on justice, on these aspects of human nature is the same. Same emphasis. In this story, a man comes home who is an honorable man, and he has to appear dishonorable. He comes as a beggar. And Eumaeus, the swineherd, remember what we said about the importance of hospitality in this world? How are they going to treat the beggar who's come from outside? A just kingdom will give him food and treat him well. That will demonstrate that they honor the gods and they know how to treat people. Polyphemus the Cyclops, was he hospitable? He ate his guests. That's not hospitable. Making your guests the banquet instead of giving them a banquet is not hospitable. What's Odysseus' kingdom like? Are they going to treat the beggar with any sense of grace and hospitality? And the answer is no. They're going to beat him up. They're going to punch him, they're going to kick him, they're going to abuse him verbally. But Eumaeus, the swineherd, who could act the same way and might, from what we know about his story, being a slave, a nobleman who's lost everything and now he's the lowest in the social pole, takes him in, gives him his bed, treats him well, reveals to Odysseus, even though he doesn't know it's Odysseus, things about how he's acted in the king's absence. And so Odysseus checks his character. And it appears like Ithaca is gone wrong from the top down. But guess what? It's only at the top that it's gone off. And this is a very interesting comment. Again, if you wanted to compare it to Scripture, Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem and he goes after the teachers, the religious leaders. He attacks the Pharisees. The common people, he tells narratives revealing what God is like. He is, of course, God. We know that. Within the narrative, they don't seem to recognize it. He just looks like another guy who's profoundly wise. He tells stories like nobody else, and they seem to have the essence of wisdom and truth in them. But they certainly don't think it's Odysseus come home. He appears like a beggar to them. And how do they respond to him then? That's the question. And so that's the question with the Christian message, is how do you respond to this Jesus who is God? Because he's not going to be as you necessarily expected him to be. But here, this figure of, wonderful figure of Eumaeus, I'll pick it up at just right, book 16. These two in the shelter, Odysseus and the noble swineherd, this is Homer's description of him. The noble swineherd, he elevates him because of his character, stirred the fire at dawn and arranged their breakfast and sent the herdsmen out with the pasturing pigs. At this time the clamoring dogs came fawning around Telemachus, nor did they bark at him as he came. And great Odysseus noticed that the dogs were fawning. Above them he heard the loud noise of footsteps. Immediately he spoke in winged words to Eumaeus. He noticed that the dogs were fawning. What is, you know what he means by fawning here? They're sort of lying down and showing respect. Who honors him coming in? The dogs. There's a sort of, the dogs seem to know more than the people. There's a little bit of virtue left in this kingdom yet. The animals recognize it. So that it hasn't, the corruption started at the top and it's working its way down. Eventually the whole foundation will be gone. But not yet, not yet. Immediately spoken winged words to Eumaeus. Eumaeus, someone is on his way here who is truly one of yours, or else well known, since the dogs are not barking, but fawning about him, and I can hear the thud of his footsteps. His whole word had not been spoken when his beloved son stood in the forecourt. Amazed, the swineherd started, so the dogs indicated that Telemachus was coming before Eumaeus even knew he was coming, because their hearing is better, right? Or they probably smelled him coming. And they revered him. Why is it the dogs behave like this? Yeah.
Because he's a good keeper of them?
Yes, because he's treated the animals well. There's something of the nobility of the man that he still treats his animals well, and they see him as their master. Amazed, the swineherd started and the vessels where he had been busy mixing the bright wine fell from his hand. He came and to meet his master and kissed his head and kissed too his beautiful shining eyes and both his hands, and the swelling tear fell from him. And as a father with heart full of love welcomes his only and grown son. Well, who would that be? That's Odysseus. but he's sitting there. But as that, for whose sake he has undergone many hardships, when he comes back in the 10th year from a distant country, so like that sort of guy, oh, you mean the man sitting right beside him asking the question? So now the noble swineherd, who's being compared to Odysseus? The swineherd, directly, unambiguously. Clinging fast to God like Telemachus, kissed him even as if he had escaped dying. And in a burst of weeping, so in other words, the wise Odysseus has a facsimile back home who is Eumaeus. He is the father figure that Telemachus didn't have.
Doesn't he call him father as well?
They do. It's extraordinary. He's effectively adopted him. Shows how far he has fallen as well, having said that. But still, the character of Eumaeus is being brought out and praised by Homer. No, he calls him the noble swineherd. So now the noble swineherd, clinging fast to God like Odysseus, and in a burst of weeping he spoke in winged words, "You have come, Telemachus, sweet light. I thought I would never see you again when you had gone in the ship to Pylos. But now come into this house, dear child, so that I can pleasure my heart with looking at you again when you are inside. For you do not come very often to the estate and the herdsman, but you stay in town, since now it seems you are even minded to face the deadly company of the lordly suitors." So Eumaeus notes that Telemachus is getting a little bit more combative. He's starting to fight with the suitors. He doesn't like the injustice. He's pushing back. And a conflict is on the horizon. Yes?
There seems to be significance in the fact that Eumaeus is always referred to in the second person.
Yes?
But I don't know what that would be.
Well, he doesn't always do this, but sometimes he does. He directly calls me, even says, "Oh, you, Eumaeus, my swineherd." Directly, when you say the second person, it's Homer that is speaking then. Yeah. We have no awareness of a narrator. The narrative happens without an awareness that a narrator is telling it, except in those few instances when the Homer himself is so moved that we recognize that he's there because he praises Eumaeus. He doesn't do it with Odysseus. He does it with Eumaeus. Why? Why does he do this? Because it's that much more praiseworthy. The hero of the Odyssey is in some sense Eumaeus. It's not, I don't mean it seriously in one sense, but the most praised character of all is Eumaeus. Homer singles him out. He intervenes into the story to praise the lowest man in the social hierarchy for his good character, for being like Odysseus and therefore like Athena and therefore representing justice. And he does it when nobody is watching. Again, very closely allied to Christian teaching. You know, don't do it in front of other men. Do it so that your Father in heaven can see it. Again, this is read to all the Greeks. The Greeks know this story and they know the characters and who's being praised and why they're being praised. And the story is morally admirable and they want to be like this. Not just for the sake of wealth and for killing your enemies. That's a very superficial reading of the story. I think the narrative makes it clear there's far more here than that. But Telemachus answers, "So it shall be, my father," right in the presence of Odysseus, who he doesn't recognize, right, because he's disguised as a... "So it shall be, my father, for it was for your sake I came here, to look upon you with my eyes, and to hear a word from you, whether my mother endures still in the halls, or whether some other man has married her, and the bed of Odysseus lies forlorn of sleepers with spider webs grown upon it." What's happened to my mother in my absence? I've come to ask you about that, because I can trust you. He calls him his father. That's how he's acted. Then in turn, the swineherd, leader of men, he doesn't lead any men. He has no army. In character, he's a leader of men. But in practice, he leads no company of men. Nobody listens to Eumaeus. But he does influence Telemachus, the son of the king. But again, this is Homer's epithet. He's describing him for his worth. All too much with enduring heart she does wait for him there in your own palace, and always with her the wretched nights and the days also waste her away with weeping. Who is she like? Odysseus. Remember we met him? He was weeping. The two of them are weeping at the beginning. So he spoke and took the bronze spear from him. Telemachus then went inside, stepped over the sill of stone, and his father Odysseus rose from his seat and yielded him place as he entered. But Telemachus from the other side checked him and said to him, "No, sit, my friend, and we shall find us another seat. Here in our own shelter, the man is here who will lay it for us." Telemachus will not take the man's seat. "No, you sit in the seat of honor. I don't need to sit there." It's hospitality, graciousness between them. And so the character is being assessed here by Odysseus and also by the audience. The readers are observing characters who are acting, and they're not acting up. They're just being who they are, and we get to observe it without any pretense. Like if it were a very important person, then they would act a part. Here in the lowliest of stations, there's no need for such pretenses. The characters of the individuals are being revealed openly. I'm going to skip over this a little bit because I want to come to another section here. Hold on a second here. Is this actually... It's just a little bit on from this. He says this to his son. 282. When Athena, lady of many counsels, puts it into my mind, I will nod my head to you, and when you perceive it, take all the warlike weapons which are stored in the great hall, and carry them off and store them away in the inward corner of the high chamber. And when the suitors miss them and ask you about them, answer and beguile them with soft words, saying, I stored them away out of the smoke, since they are no longer like what Odysseus left behind when he went to Troy land, but are made foul with all the smoke of the fire upon them. Also the son of Cronos put into my head this even greater thought, that with the wine in you, you might stand up and fight and wound each other and spoil the feast and the courting. Since iron of itself works on a man and attracts him, but leave behind for you and me alone a pair each of swords and spears. What does he do here? He reveals his identity to Telemachus. To him alone. He has dispensation from Athena to do this. So he tells him who he is. But only him, and only because Athena stood by him. And why is the question? Is it because he needs another person to fight beside him? Like there are too many suitors and it's one man and they need two? What do you think? Why would Telemachus also be involved in the big fight? Yes?
Well, he went on like a journey to find out what happened to his father.
So he's like Odysseus in his wanderings.
Yes, and just like resolve that. Or is there more?
So he's passed that test. So it's a mini version of Odysseus. And now he's going to do a mini version of Odysseus in defeating the enemies of Odysseus. And he's going to learn how to be a man beside the man. Role model. Dad, me. I'm going to be like my dad. And now Odysseus is going to be revealed in his full wrath and in his full grandeur. Like the cloak is going to come off. And suddenly there's not one man, there are two men, the father and the son. And the son, he's going to hand off the kingdom to his son. Remember, he's going to go on a journey. He's going to leave behind a just king. How do we know he's just? He punishes injustice. That's how. He didn't inherit it from Odysseus. He did it with his own hands. And so a man will come of age. Yes?
And at this point, Telemachus hasn't killed anybody, right?
Nope.
So it's kind of
Nope.
like the initiation to manhood almost?
In a sense, but they don't have the, there are certain cultures where you have to kill somebody to be a man. That's not the case here. But it would certainly be one of the expectations of manhood to go to war, to be ready to go. And when you do, there's a sense of, okay, now you've arrived. Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Yes?
Another thing, would Odysseus revealing his true identity to Telemachus be reflective of the importance of fatherhood, for instance, in terms of having his son play a role with this?
Absolutely. Because again, for the Greeks, I mentioned this word paideia, and paideia is not just conveying information, it's modeling behavior, and the modeling of the behavior, they show that it is actually sunk in when they do and act like the father. And what's the father? The father is the wise Odysseus, but he's also the just Odysseus. He's going to punish injustice. So the son is going to be a just man, just like his father is. And in a sense, he's also going to be like Orestes, the son who avenged his father Agamemnon's death at the hands of the suitors who conspired with his mother. Now, there are differences in the story because Penelope is faithful. It's a big difference. And so Penelope also gets significant praise in the story for being steadfast despite having no weapons in her hand except her deceit. She tricks the suitors. She weaves a web, a tangled web. And it is a reference to Penelope, probably. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Probably a reference to this great passage here. And the idea of a loom and weaving on it also has connotations of storytelling and deceit. And all these are strongly embedded in the Western tradition. In later mythology, Ariadne, a spider, weaves a web, and there's deceit connected with that. A story and so forth. A lot of connection between stories and narratives of deceit and not truth. As I say, Christianity is going to transform that estimation of the importance of story. But note, in both cases, it exalts virtue. Anyway, so there is a call. There's a revelation of identity to Telemachus, and there is in chapter 17. I have it written down as line 360. I haven't checked this yet, but there's a question. Remember, he's sent in incognito, Odysseus, and told to punish the suitors for their injustice. And Athena admits in line 360 of book 17 that some of the suitors may actually be better than others. But she wants Odysseus to kill them all. She wants Odysseus to kill them all. Now, because one of the we're going to find when the killing starts, one stands out and said, I didn't do these things. I was here, but I didn't do all this, and I don't deserve this outcome. He did. He was terrible, and yes, you've done rightly by killing him. But me, I was here, but I did not participate in all of the deeds that you've seen here. And Odysseus kills him anyway. Now, this would seem unjust, except that the goddess has told him to kill them all, and to then not go along with what the goddess said would make him an unjust man. So he has to do what he's told on this. But there's a divergence here between the actuality of justice and what Athena calls justice, which is deeply problematic for the text, I think. Later critics will see it that way. So justice is doing what the gods tell you, and it's not based on character, even though the whole story is based on character. How is that just? It doesn't seem right. It sort of sticks in our craw. Well, it does a little bit to Plato and the other critics of this work as well. There's a contradiction here. And it can't be the case that the gods call something just even though it involves not treating a man fairly. Not right. Yes?
Is it unjust though? Because although the suitor perhaps was not as egregious in his trespasses, he still allowed it to happen.
He allowed it to happen, he went along with it, and he was there.
Yeah.
Didn't stand against it, didn't separate himself from it. He's going to get pulled in with it, and that could be exactly the determination. Guess what? It's a mass killing event. You don't get individual pardons or on the basis of gradations of gray here. You decide to mix with a bad crowd. You're caught in the wrong place. Whose fault's that? Nobody forced you to be here, right? You're here. The wine's here, my food's here. Right? Comment or?
That same suitor, the one that was saying, but I didn't, when he says, what is my injustice? What did I do? Why you want to kill me with all of these other suitors? And Odysseus responded and said, because you're here to steal my kingdom and to steal my wife, who bore me my son.
Right.
And so that is your injustice.
So you might not have done all the things that this fellow did, but you intended them. And you would have done them, and you would have gladly, that's why you're here, otherwise you're not here. So in a sense, the intentions are being judged here, even before they've ripened to an actual deed. Comment?
I think it's even the biblical view that bystanders are almost as guilty or as guilty as the people that actually
Commit the acts.
commit the acts. Yeah, like in Matthew, Jesus was talking about how I can't quote it correctly, but there are two people were separated. So there are two groups of people, and he spoke to one group, and he said, "I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry, you didn't feed me."
And they said, well, when did we do that?
Yeah, and he said that anything you didn't do for these people, you didn't do for me.
Correct.
Right? They didn't.
And that the same lesson's being taught here, really. It's a very similar. So it's the universality of justice. It really, it's not dependent on place, circumstance, whatever. That's being taught by Homer. It's an extraordinary teaching. It really is. And again, you can see why this is considered a great book. Because there's something that's just profoundly correct, even from a Christian vantage point. Homer didn't know who Christ was. He didn't know who the triune God was. No. And yet, there's an awareness in Homer of fundamental human truths that are revealed to him, which make him highly revered and make this a great work. But there's a sort of a moral polarization that goes on here. The good are very few in the end. This is a bad time. This is the time of the judges, when everyone does what's right in their own eyes. There's no sense that there's any punishment for injustice. And there are very few good figures. Eumaeus is one of them. And that makes him particularly praiseworthy. In a corrupt age, there are only so many Noahs. And Noah's going to get mocked and regarded as crazy and a fool and whatever. You've been at it 600 years, Noah. Where's the flood? The abuse, right? And the character assassination. Very few. And the bad is many. And they are lumped together. And there may be gradations, but at the end of the day, they don't stand for justice, and so that's enough. And it seems rather harsh on a human level, but actually, in a sense, it's fundamentally the way things work. So the picture of the person who stands out against the Nazi crowd, I'm not going to go along with the Hitler salute, and everyone says, oh yeah, I would do that. Do you actually do that? Do you stand against the crowd when injustice is happening? I don't see it much myself in my 50-odd years of life. I haven't seen many people stand out against the crowd when injustice happens. Anyway, there is this moral polarization. Athena pronounces that she's going to judge all of them who have not stood out from the crowd and have allowed themselves to be associated with corruption. That's not good enough. And we'll see that Penelope likewise reveals herself. It's chapter 18. And she's been using her cunning to beguile the suitors, gets gifts from them, and for his part, Odysseus actually trusts his wife, which is interesting. It's very interesting. That's a lot of trust. She has been in a very hard situation. But the passage I wanted to read, which I love so much, is in book 17, and I'm trying to think. It's book 17. Line 3 311. No, 300. I got to backtrack a little bit. No, 290. No more. I'm not going back any further. Now, as these two, who's these two? This is Odysseus and Eumaeus, were conversing thus with each other, a dog who was lying there raised his head and ears. This was Argos, patient-hearted Odysseus's dog, whom he himself raised, but got no joy of him, since before that he went to sacred Ilion, Troy. In the days before, the young men had taken him out to follow goats of the wild and deer and rabbits, but now he had been put aside, with his master absent, and lay on the deep pile of dung from the mules and oxen which lay abundant before the gates, so that the servants of Odysseus could take it to his great estate for manuring. There the dog Argos lay in the dung, all covered with dog ticks. Now as he perceived that Odysseus had come close to him, he wagged his tail and laid both his ears back. Only he now no longer had the strength to move any closer to his master, who, watching him from a distance, without Eumaeus noticing, secretly wiped a tear away, and said to him, Eumaeus, this is amazing. This dog that lies on the dunghill, the shape of him is splendid, and yet I cannot be certain whether he had the running speed to go with this beauty, or it is just one of the kind of table dog that gentlemen keep, and it is only for show that their masters care for them. Then, O swineherd Eumaeus, you said to him in answer. Homer loves Eumaeus. You said this. This is too true. It is too true, is the dog of a man who perished far away. If he were such in build and performance as when Odysseus left him behind when he went to Ilion, soon you would see his speed and his strength for yourself. Never could any wild animal in the profound depths of the forest escape once he pursued. He was very clever at tracking. Sounds a lot like Odysseus. But now he's in bad times. His master, far from his country, has perished, and the women are careless and do not look after him. And serving men, when their masters are no longer about to make them work, are no longer willing to do their rightful duties. For Zeus of the wide brows takes away 1/2 of the virtue from a man once the day of slavery closes upon him. This is an indictment of slavery on people's character. The effect of slavery. Homer making the judgment, not condemning slavery per se, in the sense that it ought to be abolished, there should be no more slavery, but says that it degrades human beings, their moral character. If that's the case, then what do we say about Eumaeus, who's a slave? So he spoke and went into the strongly settled palace and strode straight on to the great hall and the haughty suitors. But the doom of dark death now closed over the dog Argos, when, after 19 years had gone by, he had seen Odysseus. The dog dies. He sees his master, lifts his head, wags his tail, dies. The masters come home, he recognizes him and dies. Moment of great pathos in the tale. Again, it jumps out, and Odysseus recognizes him, and again the tear in his face, just like when he tells the stories of recognition. There's something about these themes of encounter that move him and reveal the pain and anguish within him in a way that again is conveyed to the reader. So the suitors are there, still in the kingdom. And there is dramatic irony in the whole passage. He's there to conceal himself, but in the process of discerning who's loyal to him and who's disloyal, Odysseus is recognized by some. He reveals himself to Telemachus, so that's not a trick. He actually says, it is I, Odysseus. But the dogs also recognize it, and yet the people of the kingdom have not yet, and that's because he's in the disguise of a beggar. And recognition comes with a testing process, and this is important. recognition, discernment, involves a critical process. A krinos in Greek is a touchstone. Touchstone is something that will identify gold. Discern whether something's the true thing or it's false. It's like the philosopher's stone, Harry Potter stuff. It's the touchstone. There's a Christian magazine called Touchstone. Discernment. Discernment is one of the chief products of the Holy Spirit. Discernment is what Odysseus is here to do, is to figure out who is loyal and who's disloyal, and it's not obvious on the surface. He has to get behind the scenes and see how people are acting when they don't realize they're being looked at. And discernment is being cultivated. Again, this whole book of Odyssey is about wisdom, but wisdom is not only in telling deceitful tales, it's in discerning what true and false behavior are in front of you. And it's teaching us how to do that. If people are watching you, they're going to put on a show. Watch them in secret and see how they behave. And you'll have something revealed to them because people act. It says so in scriptures even. The Pharisees are called hypocrites. Do you know what a hypocrite means, literally? It's an actor. Hypocrite. Oh, hold on. Hupo, under, the critique. They're down in the theater. You're up above them. You're looking down on them. Those are the actors, are the people that we're looking down on and judging them. Is this a good performance? Are you a player? Are you wearing a mask like the actors of the ancient world, or are you revealing your true character? Discernment is, and this is part of developing the Christian mind, is developing the gift of discernment within yourself. And I would submit to you that the Greeks, just like their Christian successors, regard discernment to be something that you can cultivate by reading the great books. It's not just learning famous stories. There's a discernment process that is ripened through careful reading, not just getting through the material, but reading it intently and asking questions of the text. And some texts are better at this than others, and this is one of the great ones. So, but there's great irony, it's dramatic irony. Nobody knows who Odysseus is, except the audience. We know who he is. And yet he is revealed in certain ways. He's revealed to Eumaeus and Philoetius, and he's also revealed, and I'm going to skip to this passage, another famous passage. This is in book 19, if you want to go there, line 400. This is a little bit more inadvertent. Actually, let's go 380. That's where we should start this. Here, a revelation of Odysseus takes place inadvertently, and it's not to a wise person either. But it happens nonetheless. I'll read it. Line 380. This is the Eurycleia, his nursemaid. When he was a baby, she nursed him on her breast, fed him, like he literally was nourished by her body. She says this to him: "There have been many hard traveling strangers who have come here, but I say I have never seen one as like you are to Odysseus, both as to your feet and voice and appearance." Then resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her: "So say all, old dame, who with their eyes have looked on the two of us. They say we two are very similar each to each, as you yourself have noticed and tell me." So he spoke. And the old woman took up the shining basin she used for foot washing and poured in a great deal of water, the cold first, and then she added hot to it. Why? So the basin doesn't crack, probably. But anyway, now Odysseus was sitting close to the fire, but suddenly turned to the dark side. It doesn't mean that it's the Force and it's Darth Vader. That's not what. He turned away, and his thoughts are unseen. He turns to the dark side, and it's, oh no. For presently he thought in his heart that as she handled him, she might be aware of his scar, and all his story might come out. She came up close and washed her lord, and at once she recognized that scar, which once the boar with his white tusk had inflicted on him when he went to Parnassus, to Autolycus and his children. This was his mother's noble father, who surpassed all men in thievery and the art of the oath. And the god Hermes himself had endowed him, for he had pleased him by burning the thigh bones of lambs and kids, and the god freely gave him his favor. Autolycus came once to the rich country of Ithaca and found that a child there was newly born to his daughter. And as he finished his evening meal, Euryclea laid him upon his very knees and spoke him a word. So note here what I want to... It mentions the scar. It says the scar is a giveaway. The game is up. He's going to be recognized. And then there is this long digression about how he got the scar, and about his father, and about the hunting voyage. And it builds suspense. I think, what's going to happen here? And we get the long story of a scar which identifies the man. Of course, because he's a scar, but note the connection of a scar with everything we know about Odysseus. This is a scarred man. The scar represents the man here. He is a scarred man. He's unrecognizable. He's battered, he's bruised, he's not. And the story of how he becomes like that is part of the story that's told here by Homer. Apparently a digression, but actually intrinsically related to his identity as a man. Just this one scar on his thigh. How did he get it? Okay, so Autolycus, now find yourself that name you will bestow on your own child's dear child, for you have prayed much to have him. Then Autolycus spoke to her and gave her an answer. My son-in-law and daughter, give him the name I tell you, since I have come to this place, distasteful to many, women and men alike on the prospering earth. So let him be given the name Odysseus. That is distasteful. That's what he means. That's his name, means distasteful. Then when he grows up and comes to the great house of his mother's line and Parnassus, where there are possessions that are called mine, I will give him freely of these to make him happy and send him back to you. Odysseus the distasteful is going to become something great. It's the whole story of the Odyssey. This was why Odysseus came, so that he would give him glorious presents. So when he's Telemachus' age, coming of age, he comes to get gifts from his grandfather, he's given him a terrible name. He's distasteful, but he's going to honor him for this. And Autolycus and the sons of Autolycus greeted him with clasping of hands and words of endearment. And Amphitheia, his mother's mother, embraced Odysseus and kissed his head and kissed too his beautiful shining eyes. Autolycus gave his glorious sons the order to make ready the dinner, and they listened to his urging. And they brought in food and so forth, and then they go on a hunt. Young Odysseus, 20 years old, Telemachus' age. And the hunters, 435, came to a wooded valley, and on ahead of them ran the dogs, casting about for the tracks, and behind them the sons of Autolycus, and with them noble Odysseus went close behind the hounds, shaking his spear, far shadowing. Now there, inside that thick of the bush, was the lair of a great boar. One moment. A boar here is not a pig. A boar is a 500 to 800 pound beast with tusks and a nasty attitude. They get ornery. They get angry. They run out at you. You think you're hunting the boar? Boars eat everything, by the way. And they will eat a man. They literally are omnivores. But it's not that they hunt. They're not carnivores. They don't go hunting, but they will eat anything. And they will definitely attack. So when you go boar hunting, it's often the case the boar is going to turn on you, and you're going to fight for your life. So he's out on this boar hunt, and neither could the force of wet-blown winds penetrate there, nor could the shining sun ever strike through with his rays, nor yet could the rain pass all the way through it, so close together it grew, and with the fall of leaves drifted in dense profusion. The thudding made by the feet of men and dogs came to him as they closed on him in the hunt, and against them he from his wood lair bristled strongly his nape, and with fire from his eyes glaring stood up to face them close. The first of all was Odysseus, who swept in, holding high in his heavy hand the long spear, and furious to stab, but too quick for him the boar drove over the knee, and with his tusk gashed much of the flesh, tearing sideways, and did not reach the bone of the man. Now Odysseus stabbed at him and hit him in the right shoulder, and straight on through him past the point of the shining spearhead. He screamed and dropped in the dust, and the life spirit flitted from him. So this is how he got the scar, and how he came by the wound, 464, and he told well his story, and he went up to Parnassus with the sons of Autolycus. Now back. The old woman holding him in the palms of her hands. Used to be the baby in the palms of her hands. Now she's holding his leg in the palms of her hands. Imagine the young and the old, the nurse and the She let his foot go. She recognized the scar. She handled it. You look like him, you talk like him, you sound like him, and you got the scar. You are him. She let his foot go so that his leg, which was in the basin, fell free, and the bronze echoed. The basin tipped over on one side, and the water spilled out on the floor. Pain and joy seized her at once, and with both eyes filled with tears and the springing voice was held within her, she took the beard of Odysseus in her hands and spoke to him. Then, dear child, you are really Odysseus. I did not know you before, not until I had touched my lord all over. She spoke and turned her eyes toward Penelope, wishing to indicate to her beloved husband's presence. But Penelope was not able to look that way or perceive him, since Athena turned aside her perception. Helps when you've got a little friend there. Here. Oh. Turned away. Athena's there. Odysseus groped for her and took her by the throat with his right hand and said, if you say a word, I'm going to kill you. Not very nice. But the stakes are high. This is not a nice way to treat the old nurse who's so I'm really happy to see you. Me too. Come on, girl. No, you will not speak another word. Hush! Let nobody in the palace know of it, or I tell you straight, it will be the last thing accomplished. And if you do, by my hands the god beats down the arrogant suitors. Nurse of mine though you are, I will not spare you when I kill the rest of the serving maids in my palace. And she tells him off for this. But this is a great moment of recognition. A great moment of recognition, told in grand detail. We don't get these sorts of stories in Scripture. Digressions like this. It's an element that is characteristic of Homer. These digressive stories that build suspense. In scriptural narrative, there are similarly tense moments, and we are left to guess what the character's thinking. I'll give you one illustration. I think actually Eric Auerbach mentions it in his book Mimesis. When Abraham, who's been waiting for a child for how long? 80 years. He's 99. He gets a son, finally, with a wife. How is this even possible? They laugh. The son grows up, and then God says to him, I want you to take your son, your only son, and sacrifice him. Now, you can imagine what Moses, the narrator, could make of that story, what he's thinking and all this stuff. All we find out is that early the next morning, Abraham gets up and takes him. It's not a baby. He's a full-grown man. He gets up early in the morning and takes him to do what he's been told. It's so full of background, but it's not foregrounded. Here, everything's foregrounded. It's a different narrative technique. Both are powerful. The text in Scripture also invites discernment, but it's really reading into it and thinking into it, and sometimes you can misread it because of that, but it pulls you in. This pulls you in a different way. It's just different narrative techniques, just very, all masterful, but very different. But he is here to But that's the last moment of recognition I want to. I'm going to run out of time here. I'll have to pick it up with the final section here next class. But all of this is pushing towards justice, which is going to be displayed through action. Remember I said that Odysseus, the king, is also the judge of his kingdom. When there's no king, there's no justice, because there's no judgment. You can't have justice if there's no judgment. If evildoers are not punished, there's no justice. If rich men, like the suitors, get away with their conduct because there's nobody to punish them, there's no justice, and things keep getting worse. And corruption sets in to the point where it goes all the way down almost to the roots of the kingdom. There's almost nothing left. And Odysseus, to be the great hero, is going to have to make sure there's justice done in Troy and also back home. And that is what he's going to do in the battle with the suitors. This is a demonstration of divine justice, in other words. It's not just a story about a man, it's illustrating how the gods further justice everywhere. And sometimes they visit mortals in the disguise of strangers, mentioned in Scripture even, although it's referred to as angels there, because but a similar sort of narrative at any rate. But Odysseus actually speaks. You can write this down, look it up for yourself. Book 21, line 212, and therefore he talks as if he's acting against the suitors on behalf of the gods. That's how he understands it. And so what we have in the final scene, the contest of the bow, book 21, which I'll get to next time, is a moment of revelation. It's an apocalypse. It's an apocalyptic scene. The word apocalypse means revelation. Remember, Odysseus is under the guise of Calypso. He's been hidden away. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody knows who he is. He's right in the midst of them. They don't recognize him. Now comes the great revealing. The cloak comes off. And it comes about through the contest of the bow. I'll talk more about the contest of the bow next time. Any comments or questions before I conclude there? I don't want to start with it or not finish that here. Yes?
When are we getting our essay topics?
I'm going to send them out. Essay topics. I'm going to send them out tomorrow, because we're through the Odyssey more or less. Okay? Just to give you a little bit of time. But you can see that the themes, although there are so many differences between them, the idea of apocalypse related to judgment and punishment is also there in Scripture. There's a sense that injustice, as much as it has been left unpunished, will not ultimately be. Every injustice will be seen and rectified. And there's something apocalyptic about this. It may be horrifying, but it is just. Anyway, I'll see you next time.